morning. My name is Wubs, and I come from the Erasmus University in the Netherlands. And I'm a business historian, as you probably know. And I'm also an archive rat. I really love archives. I do theory, of course. When you have no theory, you can never enter an archive because you never know what to find in an archive. But the best thing to do for an historian is to go in the archives and to find the real stuff, the real things. So when Anders invited me again to talk, I accepted the invitation happily, and thanks for that. Because I like to meet people from the business as well, and people from the archives. So I'm honored to be here, actually. I talked in September about the same topic, but then I had an hour, so I will make it a little bit shorter. 25 minutes I have. And I will talk about usages of the past. How can companies use their own history? So I will talk about history, reputation, and storytelling. Well, this is just a quote. History is not was, it is. History is constantly changing. So when we discussed yesterday, what do you have to throw away from your archive? That's a very complicated decision. What's interesting for today can be useless for tomorrow. So you have to be careful what you throw away. It's a very complicated decision. And history is always moving. Memory is moving. And there is not one history, of course. So why do companies have to look into their own history? Well, because future decisions rely on choices made in the past. There is a past dependence. We talked about the soul of the company. To me, the soul of the company is, let's say, the structures and the past dependence. Decisions that have been taken in the past have great consequences for the future. Every company is also a learning organization, and people can learn from their mistakes made in the past. But be careful. When people say history has learned us this or that, I'm always very careful. It's mainly politicians who say history has learned us. It's mostly its ideology, because history as such doesn't learn us anything. But what I always tell my students, there is a collective memory. And if you take a company as a person, what can a person do without a memory? He cannot take any decisions. He has no reference to take decisions. And in that sense, history is necessary for every company. And then there is a principle thing. Companies are part of democracy, of our democratic system. And I believe that capitalism, in the end, if we want to contain capitalism as a liberal system, needs open societies. In the end, you cannot have capitalism with closed societies. And yesterday, Catherine Meyer used this quote in a PowerPoint: open is how humanity makes progress. If we close society, we stop development. And that's a principal question, and it's also a matter of survival. Let me move to Unilever, a company which I know pretty well because I did my own research for 5 years in Unilever. And there I found also this whole story about Charles Wilson. Charles Wilson was commissioned in 1947, after the Second World War, when Unilever had gone through a tremendous turmoil. Charles Wilson, he was a Cambridge scholar. He was an esteemed professor in history, and he was asked by Unilever to write a history. And I found all his research documents and everything, but I also found a discussion in 1952 in the board. And there was one part of the board said, no, we can't publish this. That's very bad for the company. The other part of the board said, no, we have to publish this. And here I just took two quotes from this discussion. Samuel, on the one hand, he said, the history would be a source of material for left-wing critics all over the world by focusing attention on the company. Reikens, the chairman of Unilever, also during the war, he was a left-wing liberal, I would say, nowadays. And he said, a concern which had made a full disclosure would have considerable sympathy from the public and would be less likely to be attacked. Well, they were also afraid that the antitrust authorities, which were setting up by the Americans in Germany at the time, that they would attack and research Unilever, because Unilever had 60% of the market in Germany, so they were way too big for the antitrust authorities. And Wilson wrote everything about the company structure, and it's all in the book. Eventually, the open people decided, and it was published in 1953, and it was actually the first, let's say, scientific corporate history in Europe. There were already corporate histories in the United States, but this one, and it still holds. I mean, it doesn't have footnotes. Nowadays, it wouldn't really be as good as that, but I checked actually all the things that are in the book, and it's all there. It's all in the archives. It's a pity that he didn't give the reference numbers, but it's a very good history. It gives you a very good insight into the largest company of Europe at the time. How do I know? Well, because I did my own research in Unilever, and my topic was World War II and Nazi occupation. So this was quite a challenge to the company. So in '99, I asked permission to get in the archives, and in London and Rotterdam, mainly in Rotterdam. And it took them a year to decide whether I could come in, which was very helpful actually for me, because they also produced this report, so I immediately knew which documents I really had to see. And eventually they opened the archive. I got unrestricted access to the material. I got more than 1,200 boxes. And it was amazing what I saw. And eventually I finished my PhD in 2006. And it was published in 2008 with Routledge, International Business and National War Interests, Unilever between Reich and Empire. My research questions, actually most people inside Unilever, and were we wrong or were we right during the war? I said, this was not my topic. My topic is, how did Unilever survive the war years? Because that was very strange, because the company, the continental part, was shut off from the traditional raw materials markets. Most raw materials came from Africa. The Third Reich had the ambition to sequestrate Unilever. According to Nazi law, it was a Jewish company. I don't know what a Jewish company is, but they had a regulation. One Jewish director is a Jewish company. They had, in London alone, they had 5 people from Jewish descent. And how could they go around the British Trading with the Enemy Act? They were definitely trading with the enemy, because they had more than 100 operational companies in Greater Germany at the time. Well, I'm not going to give you the answers today of these questions, because we have no time, but you can read the book or some articles. But what we can learn from that is that history can be a great challenge for a company. And it's also very helpful to better understand the company, and it can analyze its own DNA. And I would propose historians to take a rather analytical attitude instead of a moralizing attitude. That brings us much further. And actually it's very funny because in December, Unilever asked me to deliver a speech for their management, Benelux management, to talk about the history, what they could learn from their own history, and what Unilever has done in the past to do more than just make profits, for the higher goals in Unilever. Why are we there? That was my, I was asked to tell them about that. So I gave them a lot of examples about the war, etc., and they were happy about that. So there is, again, a new need inside the company to do something with their own history. Reputation, that's another topic. Love and scandal are the best sweeteners of tea. Reputation is actually a complete under-researched topic in business history. It's extremely important. Bad reputation, lower value. Good reputation, higher value. And companies begin to realize that more and more. And history can be very useful in that respect. Well, we know, of course, the Enron scandal, the largest bankruptcy in the US at the time, the biggest audit failure, and what do you see? That the stock prices really plummet at the time. Another example is Volkswagen. Volkswagen was one of these nice games of Adolf Hitler. He really likes cars. He really liked cars very much. And this project was a real Nazi project to give the people a car they could save for these cars. They could save money, but eventually they never produced it at the time. They only produced jeeps and tanks and used the savings of the workers to build them. And here is Hitler in Beetle in 1938. So there was a close connection between Nazism and Volkswagen. Even the logos, the Kraft durch Freude logo, it just has the swastika and the Volkswagen logo in it. And you see the development of the logo. Of course, in the 1950s, the reputation of Volkswagen completely changed. It became a symbol of the economic miracle, the symbol of the Wirtschaftswunder, actually. It also became a symbol of leisure time. This became the most wanted minivan ever, and still, if you have a good second-hand one, I also like these kind of vans. You pay 35,000 euros at a time, at the moment, for these much more than they ever cost from the factory. So, and they also became a symbol of holidays and even of hippiedom. It did do Volkswagen actually pretty good, this image. Recently, or 2 years ago, they came with the new Beetle, and if you look at it, I mean, Volkswagen could actually produce a Beetle which shows so much resemblance, actually, in design with the one they produced in the 1930s. But nobody cared, nobody talked about it. Because Volkswagen was no longer associated with, in any respect, with Nazism. Not at all. Which is true, of course, it's true. Volkswagen was one of the best performing companies in the world. And then, whoop, there were the Americans who destroyed Volkswagen, actually, almost. And the management at Volkswagen said, we haben nichts gewusst. We didn't hear nothing, we didn't see nothing, we know nothing. And what happened? The value of Volkswagen plummeted completely. They are still around, but they really got a heavy blow. It was a real reputation damage. So I just wanted to show how important reputation is for a company. These are negative examples. I could also give positive examples, but again, I do not have time for that. Storytelling. Marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but it's about stories that you tell. And I will give you the example of another subject. I'm studying multinational companies, but 4 years ago I also started to research fashion industry, also a very under-researched topic. And one of the companies I began to study was LVMH. Again, of course, a multinational, so that was the connection. But, well, this is the LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, is the biggest luxury company in the world. And one of the slogans was, or the main slogan was, passionate about creativity. And they are a company that produces trunks, bags, they produce fashion, high-end, pret-à-porter, ready to wear. They produce champagne, fragrances, and even watches. They bought Swiss Tag Heuer, zum Beispiel. And I think that storytelling is one of their main strategies. And why do they need storytelling? Because in luxury and the fashion and the high-end fashion market, there is a big difference between the intrinsic value of the product, the production costs, and the retail price. I mean, a bag, a Louis Vuitton bag, doesn't cost 2,000 euros to produce. I mean, you can imagine. There is a very big difference. So, you need to add value through brand management. That's very important. And the emotional value is very important. And history can be a source, and it definitely is a source for LVMH. And there is two business scholars, they even said, well, if there is no history, it must be invented. And you can tell a story in different ways. You can use true history, and from this true history you can create a myth. Or you can reappropriate true historical elements and add them to recent brands. You take historical brands and you add them to recent brands. I will show you how they do it. Or you can create just new legends based on inspiration of the past, be very loosely. And especially the creative industry, according to Perea Easterway, she says, the aestheticization of consumer products, which actually has taken place in the last 10, 20 years, intangible elements acquire economic value and are one of the most important assets in the creative industries. Yesterday we already discussed this, the intangible elements. They have become more and more important especially for luxury brands. But, as you know, luxury goes very far. It's also the car industry, the luxury cars, etc. Yachts, mentioned it. It's not just fashion, it's not just fragrances. And Bernard Arnault, he's the big guy behind this successful company. He's the CEO and the major shareholder. And in his biography, he says that he invented a new industry, the luxury industry. But creativity for him means something else than creativity for artists or designers. For him, it means to create high-quality goods to sell them around the whole world. And actually, LVMH, the merger was in 1987. It was a conglomerate of very loose businesses, different businesses, highly diversified, and it was actually a chaos. But in the end of the 1980s, 1990s, they started to rationalize the company. And by 2015, the company was set up in a multi-divisional structure, as you see, with beverages, luxury fashion, perfume and jewelry, watches, and wine and diamonds. So that's where the divisions, and you see that it's actually a very well-structured company now. Bernard is also he had a management training in the United States, so he's a pretty tough manager. And what you can see is that after the rationalization at the end of the 1990s or 1997, you see that sales go up. Profits are very high in this business. Thank you. Around 20%, which is comparably very high. And then the role of history. Well, if you look at the heritage, you can see this is about LVMH. LVMH is a coherent universe of men and women passionate about their business and driven by the desire to innovate and achieve. Innovation is constantly the word they use. An unrivaled group of powerfully evocative brands and great names that are synonymous with the history of luxury. A natural alliance between art and craftsmanship and creativity. The red words are constantly used in all the annual reports. And this is a picture just taken from the annual report. This is a picture which introduces the fragrances, and it creates the link with the past. And this is another one. Here they have a list. Every year they have, of course, another list. But what you see is that they start in the 16th century in this year with Chateau d'Yquem in 1593, and they connect it to Kenzo perfumes, for example. By creating this list, this is a list of brands, of famous brands. By creating this list, you create a kind of, as if there is a continuity. But they constantly sell and acquire new brands. So most of these brands were not set up by LVMH at all. They bought. There's another quote in the reference document. Today, the LVMH group is the world's leading luxury goods company, the result of successive alliances among companies that from generation to generation have successfully combined traditions of excellence and creative passion, etc., etc. These companies now form a powerful global group in which the historic companies share their expertise with the newer brands. That's exactly what they do. And here you see it even in an advertisement. You see a Louis Vuitton bag, and it's combined with champagne. Very clever. I mean, Louis Vuitton is from the 19th century, and Moet Hennessy is also pretty old. And when you look at the market capitalization, and you see that LVMH is actually the most successful company on the Parisian Stock Exchange. And it's not just by storytelling, but the market capitalization last year was, let's say, 75 billion euros, which is 3 times the nominal value. And here, the managing director, Meloni, he says it, we often say that our designers and our artisans are the soul of our companies, talking about the soul. But we can also state that our marketing and communications team give our brands their modernity. And that's exactly what they do. So they are actually also very open about what they do. Conclusion? Storytelling is close to history, but it's not that kind of history. It's myth and created legends, it's brand management, it's marketing, it's heritage management, and it's adding value to products. And in the case of LVMH, tremendous amount of value. So, history is more or less bunk, Henry Ford said. I hope I have convinced you of the opposite. Thank you very much.
We'll do one more. Any questions for Ben? We have one in the back there from Alexander. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. It happens that I have quite a good insight into Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. I would say there are two different kinds of companies and corporations around, also in this room. There are some groups and concerns who have a portfolio of brands and of single companies which they have acquired. And the question is always, is there a strategy behind the management of these brands or of this portfolio, or are they just adding, buying and selling these brands as it comes? Nestle, for example, would be a consumer goods case. And there are other companies, of course, who are more integrated and who are seeking more value within all the different divisions, for example, and who try to really integrate these divisions into each other. Now, you probably know that Bernard Arnault originally started in the building industry, so essentially he's a builder. He made his money, first of all, with building holiday flats very cheaply in the coast, which he then sold off. And with that money, he eventually financed the takeover of brands which were not doing that well at the time in France and trying to form a conglomerate. In view of the recent strategic decisions which he made, he puts his daughter and his sons into strategic positions in the company with, I would say, very varied success and sometimes no success, but this doesn't seem to matter very much. I doubt that this is an example of good management of the group as a whole. And I also know that archives in that group have a very, very hard time. They are a source for the designers. They're exploited by the designers. The designers know that the archives are valuable, but I don't see any strategic approach within LVMH to foster history or the archives. And I know from one particular example that it's very, very difficult for the archivists even to get the new products which are produced in LVMH. And as you have an insight into this company, perhaps you would like to elaborate a little bit on the sustainability of this approach. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your information. That's a nice addition. I didn't choose LVMH as an example of a company which I approached through the archives, because they did not allow us in the archives. They did not even give us 2 pictures for our book. So all the information we took from the internet. They have tremendous amount of information, and other sources, of course, but they have a tremendous amount of information, the annual reports and the supportive documents, 500 pages each year, for the investors. And you can take already a lot of that, but you're absolutely right. They have no interest to write their own history, not at all. They only use history, that's what I try to say, as a storytelling, as the creation of myth and to create brand value. That's how they use history. That was my that was actually my message.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll just have to say thank you right now.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.